Today, I have the honor to be presenting Dr. Rick Doblin. Hi, Rick. How are you?
Hi, Beth. I'm so glad to be here with you.
Thank you so much for doing this and taking out the time for us and the large audience watching. So I'll just introduce you really quickly. So Rick Doblin is the founder and executive director of the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, also known as MAPS. He received his doctorate in public policy from the Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, where he wrote his dissertation on the regulation of the medical uses of psychedelics and marijuana, and his master's thesis on a survey of oncologists about smoked marijuana versus the oral THC pill in nausea control for cancer patients. His undergraduate thesis at New College of Florida was a 25-year follow-up to the classic Good Friday experiment, which evaluated the potential of psychedelic drugs to catalyze religious experiences. He also conducted a 34-year follow-up study to Timothy Leary's Concord prison experiment. Rick studied with Dr. Stanislav Grof and was among the first to be certified as a holotropic breathwork practitioner. His professional goal is to help develop legal context for the beneficial uses of psychedelics and marijuana, primarily as prescription medicines, but also for personal growth for otherwise healthy people, and eventually to become a legally licensed psychedelic therapist.
Yes.
He founded MAPS in 1986 and currently resides in Boston with his wife, dog, and empty rooms from 3 children, one of whom is in college and 2 have graduated. And we're gonna have some links in today's email where this interview is to Rick's TED Talk, as well as some free essays and books that you can get at maps.org. So Rick, I'm cracking up because you still wanna be a therapist one day.
But it will only have been like a roughly 50-year detour to legalize psychedelic medicine.
One day you'll have a client, you know. So tell people, you know, your journey is so interesting, and of course, you know, you've done so much for this movement. But can you talk a little bit about your, you know, what led you here, or what even got you interested in this psychedelics as therapy? You know, way back when.
Yeah, well, you know, before we started recording, we both talked about how I grew up in Skokie, Illinois, and you had connections to Skokie also with relatives and yourself. And so when I was 6 years old and I was living in Skokie, I thought the entire world was Jewish. And, you know, all my parents' friends were Jewish. Everything was centered around the temple. And it was kind of a shock for them to tell me that not only was the whole world not Jewish, but that we were a tiny fraction of 1% of the population. And at the same time that they told me that, which was kind of scary, that the family story is, I said to them, well, what if they're right? You know, what if Jesus is the Messiah and we're like going to hell? They're like, well, chances are, you know, we're okay. But they also shared with me stories of the Holocaust. And so, you know, for those people that may not know, Skokie has also been famous from the point because the neo-Nazis did a march through Skokie, and the American Civil Liberties Union defended their right to march. And the ACLU lost a lot of support for that from Jewish members, but I think they made the right decision. But in any case, it was this understanding of our incredible minority status in the world, and also of the thousands of years of history and the recent history from the Holocaust, people trying to kill us. And so it led me to think about psychological factors. Like, you know, my dad was a doctor. My grandparents did well in business. And it just made me realize that you could have the creature comforts, but you could die because of hatred and prejudice, which seemed to me to be a mental illness in a way, you know, that you project your shadow onto others. It's not logical, these ideas. And so that just led me to think about what are factors that help people to dehumanize others, and what would be factors that would go in the other direction. So as I was growing up, I was also then a young boy during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I remember in school all these stories about here's the power of these nuclear weapons, but if you just duck and cover, you know, duck under your desk and maybe you'll survive the explosion. And you know, now it just seemed to me, not just the Nazis trying to take over the world and kill the Jews, now it's the whole world could go up in this incredible oversupply that we had of nuclear weapons. Albert Einstein said, our technology has exceeded our humanity. And so that led me to, again, think about psychology and about humanity and spirituality. And then the final confrontation for me was with the Vietnam War. And I was in one of the last years of the lottery and the draft, and I did a lot of thinking about now my own country is doing things, was trying to get me killed and trying to have a senseless, counterproductive war, again, with kind of psychological factors more than economic factors. And so I decided to become a draft resistor. And I studied a lot of nonviolent Gandhi and Tolstoy and Martin Luther King and all. And so I decided not to register for the draft. And I thought I would go to jail. I was paying taxes, I had a social security number, all this kind of stuff. But somehow or other, roughly 60,000 people never registered for the draft. And nothing happened. Absolutely nothing. We didn't have to pretend we had bone spurs or shoot ourselves in the foot or anything like that. So, but my parents were very supportive. You may know Saul Alinsky, who wrote Rules for Radicals. He did a lot of stuff in Chicago too. So that was my dad's hero. And so we grew up in this so my parents were like, okay, we understand what you're trying to do about not registering for the draft and your willingness to go to jail, but you're never going to be able to be a doctor or a lawyer or anything because you're going to be a felon. And I said, well, I'm just going to have to deal with that. I'm not willing to volunteer for this war just so I could be a doctor or a lawyer or whatever. So all of that is me just thinking more and more about what's the antidote to this kind of murderous nature of the human species. And at the same time that was going on, my parents didn't drink, they didn't smoke. And so I believed all the anti-drug propaganda. I thought that if you took LSD about 5 or 6 times, you were certifiably insane. That was the story that was going around. You have to be very careful. 5 or 6 times you are over the edge and there's no coming back. I also believed in chromosome damage. Now, that was a big thing, that you're going to hurt your chromosomes and have deformed babies. Amazingly, the first date that I ever had with my wife, now this is back in 1989, it was kind of a funny family story now. She said, I'm just interested in, what you're doing. We're sort of meeting for the first time, basically. And she's saying, but I would never, ever have a real romance with you because you've done so much LSD. We would have giraffes or something if we had kids. And I was like, well, let me defend my sperm. So that was our first date discussion. But in any case, I believed all this stuff as I was growing up. And it was a book that really changed everything for me. 2 books. The first book was, I was studying Russian and I was trying to understand the other. My great-grandparents came from Russia in the 1880s to Chicago for the American dream. And actually it was rags to riches because my great-grandfather had a rags business and built it up into a paper company. So it was literally rags. And there's a story about how he'd be on his horse collecting rags during the winter in Chicago, and he'd freeze to the saddle, and my great-grandmother had to come and pour water on him to unfreeze him from the horse and stuff. But in any case, it was this kind of very much of this sense of obligation that I had this multi-generational history behind me to work on, deeper threats. And when I was in my Russian class, I was trying to understand these people that might, throw bombs at us and stuff. And I spent the summer in Russia after I was 16, after my junior year of high school, and I did all sorts of stuff there. But this guy in my Russian class gave me this book to read, and I loved it. And when I handed it back to him, he said, do you realize that this author wrote some of this book under the influence of LSD? I'm like, impossible. LSD is disorienting, hallucinations, crazy, and he said, no, check it out. It turned out he was true. It was right. And it was One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest by Ken Kesey, some of which was written under the influence of LSD. So that was the sort of crack in the propaganda for me. And then when I was at college, at New College in Florida, which was an experimental school, no grades, all written evaluations. The students' curiosity is the most important thing. Everybody had to do a senior thesis. You could do off-campus study. You could do independent study stuff. That's where I started taking a bunch of LSD and mescaline. And I had these intimations of sort of ego dissolution and connection with something, the historical, meaning evolutionary time from the Big Bang, all these kind of intimations, but I had very difficult emotional experiences. I wasn't able to let go. I was, not such a strong ego. I was insecure with a lot of things. And so, but I felt this was after 1970 when the Controlled Substances Act came in, and the 60s had crashed and burned, and psychedelic research was wiped out around the world. And I started feeling like this is something important here, that it's different from what I was told, and that I felt that there was political implications of the mystical experience, that if you feel this connection to everything, then we have more in common with people that are different from us than we have differences. Our genes are 99.9 whatever percent. There's a few differences of skin color or things, but primarily we're the same. And I felt that was the antidote to genocide and to fundamentalism and to racism and to being motivated by fears and anxieties. But I had such a difficult time. I went to the guidance counselor at my college, and I said, I need help with my tripping. Now, this is 1972.
Oh my God.
If you do that now, you might be kicked out of school or something. But for me, at the time, it was a lot of inner voyaging people were doing. And this guidance counselor, this is just like one of the luckiest things ever happened in my whole life. This guidance counselor handed me another book, and he said, you might want to read this. And it was Realms of the Human Unconscious, Observations from LSD Research by Stanislav Grof, who is one of the world's leading psychedelic researchers, a founder of transpersonal psychology. He's 89 years old now. He's just written summation of his life's work called The Way of the Psychonaut, Encyclopedias for Inner Journeys. And so it's for the next generations, and MAPS has published it so people can get that. But it was reading this book of his reports of LSD research after it had been shut down that changed everything for me. So I said, this is it, because he's talking about spirituality, he's talking about psychotherapy, he's talking about birth trauma, but he's talking about it through a lens of science. It wasn't through a lens of mythology, religion, fundamentalism. It was through a lens of science. And he was acknowledging that this unit of mystical experience can have these attitude changes, but overall, it was connected with a reality check, which was therapy. Are we able to use these states of mind and these experiences that people have under psychedelics to help them feel better in this life? It wasn't about spirituality to have the better afterlife or get off the wheel of reincarnation. Well, it was about improving this life, which I think relates a lot to the whole Jewish epic as well. It's about tikkun olam, about repair of the world. It's about this world and making it better, fairer, more just. And so I thought, psychedelic research has been wiped out. Nixon is declaring the war on drugs. He's saying Leary is the most dangerous man in America. And I was like, well, what's Leary doing right? He must be doing something good to be getting Nixon so pissed off. And so I thought, I might be going to jail. I don't know when that's going to happen, when they're going to come after me for this draft resistance, but I want to be a psychedelic therapist. And I want to go through psychedelic therapy. And this seems like the best contribution that I could make to the world. And what I'm just so lucky about is now I'm almost 67. Next month, I'll be 67. And the ideas that I had when I was 18 still make sense to me now after this whole lifetime of experience. So I do hope that once we've made MDMA into a medicine approved by FDA and regulatory agencies around the world, that then I could set up a little psychedelic clinic on the beach somewhere, be a therapist. And we also work with a two-person team. So the therapist is two people, often male, female, not always, but that's kind of the model. And one has to be licensed as a therapist and the other can be a student or unlicensed. So I figure I'll be the unlicensed person, and I'll have to find a woman that's a therapist that has a license that I could work with her as, because I don't know about going back to school to get another degree to be a therapist. That is my goal. And I've studied, as I said, with Stan Grof, with holotropic breath work. And over time, I have sat with people while they're doing psychedelics and have had some experiences doing that. And in particular, in 1984, and that's part of my TED Talk, is a woman that I sat for who had PTSD in 1984. And that's where I saw with my own eyes how helpful MDMA can be for PTSD. And so now we're all these years later, 38 years later, or 36 years later, and 38 years later. And it's great. Wow.
Amazing story. Thank you so much for sharing all that. And, it's such an interesting journey to get to where you're at now, dedicating your whole life to, bringing these to the forefront. Now there's so much movement, the mainstream media, it was just on the cover of the Washington Post magazine.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. What do you, one question I've been asking everybody in this series is, now that we're living in this kind of, new world of, COVID and kind of questioning everything, and it's been very traumatic for a lot of people. Have you seen a difference in, the let's say the demand for psychedelics before COVID versus after in the last 7 months? Like, what has changed in this kind of new world where it seems like everything is in chaos?
Yeah. Well, a report just came out several days ago from the military, the Department of Defense. And what they said is that suicides of active duty military have gone up 20% in the last year. So I think what's happened because of COVID is that people have really got to understand now the incredible reach of depression, anxiety, social anxiety, mental illness. People really understand more than ever before the need for new approaches to help people deal with stress, anxiety, trauma. 200,000 plus people have died. Just think about what's going on with all of their family members. So the other thing that's happened is that this growing movement, and this maybe relates to the business part, is that it's only been recently, I'd say over the last couple of years, that for-profit entities have thought about entering into psychedelics. That up till when I started MAPS in '86, which was 34 years ago, nobody would think about for-profit. There was just, first off, research was shut down all over the world. There was political opposition. There was public attitudes against it. No drug, no psychedelic had ever been made into a medicine. So what's changed also over the last couple of years is because of the work that MAPS and Hefter, USONA, other nonprofits have done to open the door to this kind of research with MDMA, psilocybin, LSD, it's changed cultural attitudes. And so what we just had about 2 weeks ago, was Compass Pathways, a for-profit company working on psilocybin, went public, and now they have like a $1.3 billion market cap, and they're only in phase 2, and we're in phase 3. So what that means is that we've taken in over $100 million in donations, which is astonishing over the course of all donations. And so we have built an enormous amount of public value. Who knows what it would be worth, but we are very close in only a couple more weeks to find out if our first of 2 phase 3 studies of MDMA assisted psychotherapy for PTSD was statistically significant. We've just completed a $30 million fundraising campaign called the Capstone Challenge. There was a great article in the Wall Street Journal about it that was about where all the donors come from. And the donors come from mainstream America. I mean, these are successful people from tech, from Wall Street, from inherited. We just have an incredible collection, and bipartisan. And then the other thing that's been happening at the same time is this 30-year effort since 1990 for us to do research inside the Veterans Administration. And so we've just signed a CRADA, which is a collaborative research and development agreement with the Bronx VA about an MDMA study that will take place, and the FDA has approved the protocol. So now it's going to the Institutional Review Board at the Bronx VA, and we'll know by the middle of November. We think they're going to approve it. The Loma Linda VA has approved a study for MDMA.
Wow.
That the FDA has also approved. Their IRB has already approved it. We're waiting for the state of California approval. And so we're sort of seeing this kind of mainstream acceptance because of the need, and because of the fact that MAPS is now 100 people, all supported by donations. And then there's 2 separate entities. MAPS, which I started in April of 1986. And then in December of 2014, we started the MAPS Public Benefit Corporation, because that was under the assumption that we might actually succeed in making MDMA into a medicine. And if so, we want to be the pharmaceutical company to market it. So we are a nonprofit pharmaceutical company, but one of the things that's been helpful, I think, to our donors is to say that there is so much research that needs to be done. MDMA is great for PTSD, but it's good for social anxiety. And we're starting an eating disorder study. It's good for people with life-threatening illnesses who are anxious about dying. There's an incredible study that was just done by a Dr. Ben Sessa for alcoholism with MDMA to deal with the trauma that drives people to escape. So there's an enormous amount of uses, which will take, hundreds of millions to study of all of these things. But what we've been able to tell donors is if you help us get MDMA for PTSD into a medicine, then we can start selling it as a medicine and we can charge a reasonable profit. And so we started the for-profit public benefit corp. So we're trying to demonstrate a new approach to psychedelic psychotherapy to treating mental illness. And we hope we'll be the first in class of psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. Ketamine has been approved recently, but it's as a pharmacological agent. It's a lot better when it's combined with therapy for depression, but you need less ketamine and more therapy. So that's not so good for the pharmaceutical company. But we hope to be the first to demonstrate psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, but we also want to demonstrate a new way to market it, which is really maximizing public benefit, not profit. And so the for-profit company that we have is a public benefit corporation, but it's 100% owned by the nonprofit. And so that's our corporate structure. And so we are trying to demonstrate how nonprofit is different than for-profit. Compass Pathways, we support the efforts of for-profits. We need them, but we think that, the scale of the problem is so big, but we think that we will do things differently. We will share our information. We're not going to try to get patents to block other people from doing things. We're going to not charge whatever the market is going to bear. Our mission is mass mental health more than it is amassing profits for the founders and for the staff or the investors. So we're sharing our protocols. The other big thing that makes us different is that we are supporting drug policy reform. So these other groups are saying, we're trying to make psychedelics into medicines. We're doing that too. But we feel that the drug war is a fundamental violation of human rights. It's counterproductive. It's racist. It's used for mass incarceration. It's used to deny felons the right to vote in certain swing states, like in Florida. It's very unconstitutional, very racist. And so, but from a business perspective, with our goal being mass mental health, not mass money, we want to change the drug laws so that people have access to these substances in a licensed legalization system where they can buy it and do it on their own. And we want to embed peer support information. We'll be training more people about how to help their own experiences, how to help others with difficult experiences. And so basically we want people to not have to buy it from us. And we're trying to get insurance coverage, and we're doing cost effectiveness studies and things like that. So I think this is the sort of two track. One is medicalization covered by insurance that is with trained therapists. And then the other is freedom of people to explore on their own. And a lot of times people can heal themselves, particularly if it's earlier after the trauma. If you don't wait till it kind of solidifies into chronic PTSD, it should be easier to treat. And there's a lot of people that have taken MDMA and other psychedelics that have made a lot of progress on their own without therapy. But at the same time, there are people that have taken that on their own without therapy and have been made worse off. If they're not in a position to really work on the issues, they try to stuff their feelings down, they end up worse off. So, but that's our big picture.
We had a speaker mention that. Actually, it was my partner who, because we've seen a lot of re-traumatization if you're not getting the right tools, and support to help integrate the experience. And also if you're already really traumatized, then it can actually make things worse. But, I have to say, just being out there talking about this for the last few years, I have heard a lot of people, the widest criticism has been around, the companies that are going to make money off of these, sacred medicines that are free from the earth, referring to psilocybin or ayahuasca. But it's really, I see your business model is, okay, if you guys are making it more accessible and the price stays, affordable or relatively accessible, then it's actually going to make the whole, I mean, there's no way someone's going to pay $1,000 if MAPS has it for $50, let's say.
Well,
so hopefully,
I think that's a really good point, that we want the nonprofits to be a check on the for-profits.
Yeah.
We want the for-profits to amass resources, to do research, to change attitudes in regulatory agencies and academic institutions. Now we see Harvard is trying to set up a psychedelic center. They've already got millions of dollars committed to it. And that's where Timothy Leary and Ram Dass and Ralph Metzger came from. Yale is doing the same. Mount Sinai is doing the same. NYU, UC San Francisco, Medical University of South Carolina. All these places are setting up dedicated psychedelic research centers. And so I do think we want to welcome the for-profits, but have the nonprofits as a check on what they do.
Yeah, accessibility, I think, will always be this larger conversation, especially, you've mentioned racism. I've had a lot of BIPOC speakers in the series, and it has come up, and there's been a whole conversation around this as well, is, how do we make these accessible when, it right now, I mean, I guess depending on who you're working with, it can be upwards of, thousands of dollars for just a few sessions. But the one thing I want to talk about that you've said, and, it's even part of your bio, is, being able to access these medicines for your own personal use, your own personal growth for otherwise healthy individuals. So let's talk about that, because that was the one thing that kept calling me to talk about this more publicly, years ago. As someone, I help a lot of people. My main goal with the work I do is I help people make transitions into, work that more aligns with who they are, what their heart is telling them to do. And it tends to be people who, have gone through some kind of awakening where they're like, what, my job is making me depressed and miserable and causing me anxiety, and I really want to go do this instead. And I started noticing a lot of people who were using and working with psychedelics and sacred plant medicines would have exponential growth in this area, where they're like, I just can't live the lie anymore, and I need to go make some changes in my life. These are people who are not doing this in a therapeutic setting, which of course we all know that this is probably a larger majority of people who are just working with psilocybin or LSD. What do you see as, like the future of that? Because this is also, the majority of people out there are, doing these on their own, or, don't even have access to a psychedelic assisted, therapist. What do you suggest for people who are looking to just start exploring, but they're otherwise healthy? What is the key to their, success on their own?
Well, let me just mention the Oregon Psilocybin Initiative. So this is going to be on the ballot in Oregon. It's to create a whole new state-regulated group of guides and therapists, and access to people to have psilocybin experiences under supervision. And what makes it unique is that it's not just for people with a diagnosis, it's for people that are healthy as well, for personal growth. And so they're trying to set that up on a state level, and it'll be heavily regulated. They're going ahead of FDA approval, and they're saying that people should have access to these situations. And so, Denver has made mushrooms the lowest enforcement priority. So has Ann Arbor, Oakland, and other cities are talking about it as well. So we just have an agreement signed with the city of Denver. We have what's called the Zendo Project, psychedelic harm reduction, that we do at Burning Man and elsewhere for people with difficult trips. And so we have this agreement with the city of Denver to educate their first responders, the police, the hospitals, the emergency room people, about what happens if they get somebody with a difficult mushroom trip. How do you de-escalate? Don't tranquilize them, support them, call other people that we're going to be training. So I think for these groups that are using it, most people that are using it for personal growth that don't have a psychiatric diagnosis, they really need a lot of honest education. So far, we've had a lot of dishonest education that exaggerates the risks and minimizes or denies the benefits. There's impure drugs. How do people know what they're really getting? That's another big issue as well. And so we need more drug checking. We need treatment on demand. We need honest education, but we need to embed in the culture an understanding that difficult is not the same as bad. I think that's one of the key statements of our principles of the Zendo project. The other ones are, create a safe space, sitting, not guiding. What that means is that, well, first off, you need a safe place. You need to feel safe. You need to be able to open up to whatever is happening. Whoever is the supporter, the sitter with you, creates a safe space. Then sitting, not guiding means that we follow what's emerging from the person. Our therapeutic method is not that we have guided imagery or we have a superimposed cognitive behavioral therapy approach. It's we support what's coming. There's this sense of this inner wisdom that we call it the inner healing intelligence. And we all know that that's the case for our body. Our body has this healing intelligence. Without our conscious intention, it heals itself wherever it can. You have to remove the impediments. Similar thing we think is going on with the psyche. The impediments are fear, trauma, certain kind of patterns of thought or addiction or things like that. We have to sort of help, but this wisdom of what's emerging into awareness is somehow ordered, and we support that. The other is difficult is not the same as bad. That's really important to know. And the other is that we talk through, not talk down. Meaning that we don't say, oh, you're having a difficult time. Well, look at these rainbows and butterflies and the world is beautiful. It's like, what's bothering you? Let's go into it. You go into it and through it. Stan Grof has said this beautiful thing, which is the full expression of an emotion is the funeral pyre of that emotion, meaning that everything changes. And if you can fully feel being trapped and you sort of go into that you're in hell and you're never going to get out, once you accept that, then you sort of move on. And you don't actually get out, but it becomes part rather than the whole. So there's a part of us that's always trapped, but a part of us that's always seeing new things. So I think this idea of changing the frame of the foreground and background, people who are depressed or PTSD, their traumas, their depressions is the foreground. And then you can sort of say those things are still true, those things still happened, but they can be you can grow beyond them. So I think this is merely to say that there are so many people that don't have a psychiatric diagnosis. For me, when I was 18, it was doing LSD and mescaline that really helped me form my mission in life. So I think there's going to be a lot of use by people for vision quests, for what's their purpose in life. At the same time, when we were sharing stories before we started about our parents, relatives who died, there's going to be a great use of psychedelics at the end of life to help people let go and to have these beautiful moments of recapitulating their lives with their loved ones. Well, MDMA, for people that are dying, MDMA has an anti-pain effect. So we've worked with cancer patients who are on opiates for pain, but the opiates make them numbed out. But you add MDMA to it, and now the stimulant properties of MDMA wake them up. It's synergistic, better pain control. They're open-hearted, and they can say goodbye to their loved ones in this kind of miraculous period of hours where they're there. In the middle of life, we all talk about the midlife crisis, or a lot of the people you're trying to coach, or they talk about building, climbing the ladder of success, only to realize it's up against the wrong wall. So psychedelics in the midlife are great. There's a series of challenges at every stage of our life, and I think psychedelics can play a role in that. And the more that it's available to people who don't have a psychiatric diagnosis, it'll be like preventative medicine. It will prevent people from getting these diagnoses. And so we need that. I think it's very important for spirituality, for personal growth, but we shouldn't have to be part of a, quote, organized religion. So it shouldn't depend on religious freedom. It shouldn't depend on having a psychiatric diagnosis, but just as part of our ordinary development. And I'll just say one last thing, which is that we talk about mainstreaming psychedelics and bringing it into Western culture, but that implies that it's never been mainstream before. But actually the origins of our culture from 1600 BC in the Greeks to 396 AD was the Eleusinian mysteries. Everybody, Plato, Socrates, Pythagoras, everybody that we think of as the foundations of Western culture participated in the Eleusinian mysteries that had at its core a potion called Kykeon that was a psychedelic potion. And they had a mystical experience, and it was wiped out by the Catholic Church in 396. which wanted to be the intermediary between you and God. And so you could say that we've had this kind of suppression of this thing. You know, the conquistadors, when they came to the New World, one of the first things they did was kill the shamans and drive the shamans that were using mushrooms and peyote, kill them. They were a direct experience of spirituality that people could have. And this organized religion, and some of them at least, wanted to be the intermediary between you and spirituality. But that also permitted, you could say, our rational mind to flourish as we suppressed all these other things. And that's led to this fact that we can talk right now in a miraculous example of science, you know, distant, and people can watch, and it's miraculous what we're doing. Of course, it follows the rules of science and physics and things like that. But now we're at the stage of humanity where we're destroying the world. We're wiping out the environment. We are driving species into extinction at an alarming rate. Climate change is changing things, and that we have more destructive weapons than we've ever had before. And we see now from political leaders around the world the ability to tell false stories and to motivate people based on tribalism and fears and anxieties. But the truth has been long gone. So as a human species, we are in grave danger. And so I think we need very much the experiences that psychedelics can produce. They're the healing experiences, the spiritual experiences, and to realize that, you could have billions of dollars, but if you live in a culture that's inflamed and at war, it's not a beautiful place to live. So that we need to have more equitable distribution of resources. And I think with our science, we can feed everybody. Everybody could have a really good life if we just had that core essential mission of fairness and public benefit.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing. So actually, speaking of, personal freedom to choose to ingest whatever you want into your own body, something that's come up a lot. So I ask a question every time someone joins our Facebook group. There's almost 2,000 people in there. And the one response I see more than any is that so many people want to incorporate psychedelic work into their business. A lot of people are coaches or healers or, non-licensed therapists, like some other sort of, a life coach or a somatic therapist that didn't get a license. I know people who are doing this illegally, like microdosing coaching exists. What do you say to these people out there that want to start, infusing this into their work, but not get in trouble? I mean, that's the number one thing that stopped me from even discussing it for about 5 years, So.
Yeah. Well, let me applaud you for starting to discuss it and say that when we look at our culture, one of the things that's been most effective has been gay rights, gay marriage. And it's because people came out. It's people, acknowledging that they were gay. So we need a massive coming out of people interested in psychedelics as well. And because of the legal circumstances, a lot of people haven't been comfortable. But as more and more people do that, that will change things a lot. But to all these people that are interested in not getting in trouble and doing this work, I think that there is a certain amount of risk that people need to accept. And I think that there's a challenge in that at least the medicalization route is going to require at least the lead therapist to be the one that has a license as a therapist. The other person, and this is what we're negotiating with FDA about the credentials of the second person. But I think there's opportunities to be partnered with somebody that has a license, an unlicensed person. So that's an opportunity. I think the other part is that there's ways, we have what's called the psychedelic integration list. So these are people, therapists. We have hundreds of people on our website that are offering services to coach or talk to people before they do a psychedelic experience and then talk to them afterwards to help integrate it. But they stay away from actually saying we're going to offer psychedelic experiences. So that's one way to kind of do it safely, is you're not actually directly involved in illegal behavior. You're just talking to people about their interest in exploring psychedelics, and then after they've done so, integrating. Also, there are ayahuasca circles all over America that are flourishing. Most of them are illegal because the Supreme Court accepted the União de Vegetal, the UDV Church. The Ninth Circuit accepted the Santo Daime. but those are specific religions, and most of the ayahuasca circles are not in those specific religious contexts. So technically they're illegal, but there's no enforcement really. Also because there's not really many problems. There can be problems, but at a time when we have opiate epidemics and so many people are dying from that, the police are not really looking at victimless crimes, you could say, like that. So I think the level of risk in certain situations is lower. You can bring people to the Netherlands for mushroom truffles, where those are legal. You could bring people down to Mexico for ibogaine, or bring it down to South America for ayahuasca. So there are opportunities. But I'd say for the people that are really interested in doing this work and not getting in trouble, they should really be speaking out to do this kind of coming out, and they should be working on drug policy reform to try to really make it so that we decriminalize or eventually legalize these drugs. Just to say our long-term plan, we think, is that 2023 or so, we hope to have Mdma approved as a medicine by the FDA, by the Israeli Ministry of Health, and by Health Canada. We are starting research in Europe now. Assuming that our first phase 3 study is statistically significant, which we'll know at the end of this month, then we're going to start a new $30 million fundraising campaign to bring MDMA for PTSD to Europe and around the world. And that will, I think, have a big impact as well. But what we're trying to do is to make it so that there are many opportunities for people to get involved. We need business people who know about running clinics. A lot of therapists are not business people, and trying to get them help to run a clinic. We need people who are connected to the insurance companies to help us figure out how to get insurance coverage. We're going to need body workers. We're going to need music therapies. We're going to need all sorts of skills to combine with psychedelics and the psychedelic clinics. So we think, let's say 2023, we think the psilocybin, compass pathways, usona, they're going to follow later near the end of 2023, 2024, something like that. Then we think there'll be a decade of psychedelic clinics, thousands of clinics being set up all over America, Canada, Israel, Europe, we hope, thousands of clinics. And then these clinics will have people that will go to them because they'll have a diagnosis, but we're also exploring opportunities for family members. So if you have a family member that's addicted, it affects the whole family. If you have a family member that has PTSD, it affects everyone they're in relationship with. And we've just done one study, a treatment development study, was cognitive behavioral conjoint therapy developed by a woman, Candace Monson, for PTSD. Conjoint means couples or dyads, where one person has PTSD, it affects the relationship, and they bring both people into the therapy. And we've been able to give both of them MDMA. And it's been tremendous with the relationships. And it's also been very helpful with the person with PTSD, even more so than when they didn't use MDMA. So the clinics will be the patients, then the family members, and then eventually we think in 2035, there'll be so many people telling stories of how they've benefited from this that we'll move to a system of license legalization. This is now the dream plan. And I think license legalization, it's where, we know that you have to have a driver's license. And if you misbehave driving, you can have your driver's license taken away. But if you're a drunk driver, you get arrested for driving under the influence, you could end up losing your driver's license, but you can still go buy alcohol. And a lot of people are killed by drunk drivers who've already lost their driver's license. So there should be both a right and a responsibility paired up. So we should have freedom to have access to these drugs, but we should be punished if we misbehave under those drugs. And the punishment should be what we misbehave, whatever that happens to be, but also we should lose our license to buy these drugs for a period of time, or however it happens to be. And then the clinics are going to be sites of initiation. So let's say you want a license to do psychedelics. So you go to one of these clinics, it's basically free, paid for by tax money, the same way that you have to drive in a car with a driving instructor to see if you know what to do. And so you have an experience under supervision, and then you get a license to go do it on your own. And you could do it in a party setting or personal. So that's where we think 2035, after a decade or so more of laying out the psychedelic clinics. And so for people that want careers who don't want to have licenses in therapy, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities as we move forward. But initially, I would suggest to people that to the extent that they can, to find therapists to work with, because that will be the more direct, immediate kind of openings. But also, I'd say we have the treatment manual that describes our therapeutic approach and what's called adherence criteria. So we have adherence raters that watch the videotapes to provide supervision to the psychedelic therapists, and it's a way to score, how well they're doing on certain dimensions. And so, again, because we're nonprofit, this is all for free up on our website. So you can read the treatment manual, the adherence criteria, learn about psychedelic therapy. I'd say Stan Grof's book, Way of the Psychonaut, is good for people to read. There's a lot of literature about psychedelic therapy, but the most important thing of all is your own experiences. And I think the more that you can have them, and not just like take it on your own, but have someone sit for you. Because when you have someone sit for you, what that means is that the part of your brain that always is thinking about your own survival, if you're tripping by yourself at home, what's going to happen when the doorbell rings, or what's going to happen when the phone rings, or who knows, or what's happened when you really go inner and you lose this sense of what's inside, what's outside, because you're so wrapped up into these painful or ecstatic memories. So having someone there that's sort of your reality check, that permits you to go even deeper. And so I'd say practice with each other and have your own experiences. And also I should say that you can get to anywhere that you can get to with psychedelics without psychedelics. It's a lot harder. You can do it sometimes with meditation or gratuitous grace. They sometimes say it just comes on you, these spiritual experiences. But the reason I want to emphasize that is that when you take psychedelics, you're not having a psychedelic experience. You're having a human experience that the psychedelic helped you see. So in a way, when you look through a telescope, you're not having a telescope experience. You're having an experience of the cosmos that the telescope helped you see. Similarly with a microscope, you're having an experience of these inner worlds that are too small to see otherwise. But when you have a psychedelic experience, it's a human experience, and you can get there. Stan Grof developed holotropic breath work, which is just hyperventilation to stimulate a lot of the same things. Although, while that's true, for most people, and for me, it's more reliable to take psychedelics. And I think because we're at such a crisis of time and a crisis of suffering, we should try to use those tools that are more efficient. But we don't ever want to make the claim that it's only through psychedelics that you can get to these experiences.
Of course. Wow, Rick, thank you so much. This has been an amazing conversation. You give me a lot of hope for the future.
Good. Well, I think.
I've always been optimistic.
Yeah. Well, I want to say that you mentioned before the Washington Post article.
Yeah.
It was the cover of the Sunday Washington Post magazine just last Sunday. And we're trying to figure out, it's about our efforts to train therapists of color and to do inclusion. But we're thinking, why 1 month before the election in Washington, D.C., on the cover of the magazine, they put this story about psychedelics. And the reason we think is because it was a hopeful story. People need hope. It's about healing. It's about inclusion. And I think a lot of people have had that impression from reading that story. It's very hopeful.
No, that's good, because a lot of people are feeling very hopeless this year. And, I'm one of those people that believed, even the day our current president was elected in 2016, I thought, okay, I think there's only going to be goodness that comes out of this, even though it's going to be a very rough patch, because I do believe this is what it takes to have large scale social change. Yeah. It's not always easy and comfortable, and this year we're seeing it played out in every single way possible. And every day there's something new. Even today there's something new, and it's, but I do believe the outlook is positive,
I think,
eventually.
Yeah. The long arc of history bends towards justice. Sometimes it's hard to see, and sometimes it goes backwards. And I think, we're in danger of a military takeover of the government just in a month. On the other hand, I think that's becoming less and less likely. But it's a challenge. We are at a cusp in our history that we've never quite been at risk in this same way. And it's very frightening. But I think that this people who are feeling hopeless, that's what a lot of the authoritarians want you to feel.
Yeah.
So we've got to get out of the hopelessness, take action, and work for the common good.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much. This was such an honor to have you here. Everybody will love and appreciate hearing all this. And, we have some free resources, your TED Talk, some resources from MAPS. We're also going to put in your donation link because, and we'll, we're donating a portion of the proceeds for this series, which we've actually raised a lot so far, and a portion is going to MAPS. I'm also giving to some other BIPOC, led nonprofits in the psychedelic space. So thank you so much for the work you're doing. Everybody out there greatly appreciates MAPS and all that the future holds. Thank you for your time today, Rick.
Thank you, Beth. Yeah, this public education is so important. I really appreciate it.